And that was just a little piece from To Invoke the Morning, a work in progress by Ross Edwards, performed by Riley Lee. Thank you so much, Riley, for that lovely performance.
Hello, Annabelle.
Hey, and those flutes that you're using, so you had quite a mix of them there,
Yes.
in all slightly different sounds, but they came from a very long time ago, didn't they?
Well, I mean, they weren't made that long ago, but the instrument, we don't know when it was first developed. It could have, there's one theory, it's totally a hypothesis, not even a theory, started in Egypt in 4,000 years ago as a in-blown flute made of a reed, and it traveled possibly through the Middle East and Central Europe, became called the ney, and then went into India and into China, and it then was made from bamboo, local material. It came into Japan in the 700s, and the Japanese call it the shakuhachi, which is related to the length of the standard length instrument. And as you say, they come in different lengths, but that's now become the generic term.
So they're quite a lot bigger than a regular flute that you'd see in classical music, aren't they?
Well, the standard length is about the same length, but the
much wider.
Yeah, it's a piece of fairly thickish bamboo, and there's these big ones that are huge. They're twice the length of that. They're I don't know, over a meter long and very, very thick. And there's
big
teeny
fingers
tiny
for
ones
that,
too.
would you? Or
No. Well, yes, you do. You need long fingers
and a hell of a diaphragm.
The breathing is important. Yes. Yes.
So those older ones, do you know how they've changed over the centuries?
Well, we know when they first came into Japan, they had 6 holes instead of modern-day flute has 5. Shakuhachi has 5. There were 4 holes in the front, 1 in the back. Now there are, and previously there were 5 holes in the front, 1 in the back. And the what would you call that? The relative of this instrument that still exists in China, the dongxiao, unless they share an ancestor, still has 6 holes. And they became thicker, and the mouthpieces changed in a way that one can manipulate the dynamic range and pitch much more easily than the early flutes. So they actually have changed a lot.
Right. I love the free-flowing feel to them as well. Sometimes it feels like the phrase doesn't quite finish the way that classical music would. It's almost like the finish of a thought, isn't it? Like the way you would converse, that you might run out of something to say and then start something else.
That's true. Yes, that's very true. Particularly the traditional pieces are like that. It's a whole different way of thinking about music. It's been said that these traditional pieces, in a sense, are made of breath phrases. The breath kind of controls the length of the phrase, and every phrase is an entity of itself. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And any phrase could be the end of the piece. Any phrase could be the beginning of the piece. This might be one of the reasons why some people don't like it, find it kind of boring, because it seems very
ongoing.
It doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And a colleague of mine once explained it, I think brilliantly, that this type of music, and perhaps Asian music in general, doesn't particularly take the listener on a journey, but it creates an environment, an atmosphere in which the listener can take his or herself on a journey.
And yet to me it feels like it's absolutely a journey, but it's not one with set length pavers that you walk across. It's a little bit of grass here and over the rocks here and through the stream here. Interesting. Now, I love the story of how you got introduced to the shakuhachi. Do you want to tell a little bit about that story?
Well, I had heard the shakuhachi prior to this. My brother brought home this recording when I was in high school. I fell in love with...
How old were you then?
16, 17. Anyway, I went to Japan not to study shakuhachi, just because I had the opportunity to go there. But I remembered shakuhachi. I thought, I'll just go and buy one. And bamboo flute won't cost much. And at that time, they sold these shakuhachis in department stores. So I went up, and there was a man. I thought he was an old man. He's probably 20 years younger than what I am now. But anyway, I had all these shakuhachis up, on display. From nowadays would be equivalent, say, of $1,000 to $5,000. They weren't cheap, but for me they were cheap because this was when the yen was very, very cheap, when Japan was almost like a third world country, just before the boom, as it were. And I could afford, so for me, the $5,000 flute nowadays, back then would have been $500. I could afford any of them, and they just were pieces of bamboo. So I could have bought the $500 flute, but why spend that much for just a piece of bamboo? So I asked him, well, so what's the difference? They just look like pieces of bamboo. You'd think a person selling flutes would then encourage me to buy the more expensive one by explaining why.
Mm-hmm.
But he looked at me, and there must have been something. I don't know what he saw, but he looked in my eyes. He said, "Do you really want to know?" I said, Yeah, I do.
Dangerous question.
Exactly. Yeah. 50 years later. Yeah. No, so he says, well, in that case, you need a teacher. You need to find out yourself. You need to be taught. You have to find it out, and I'll introduce you. And back then, you couldn't just go up to a teacher. You needed an introduction.
That's a Japanese sort of way of working
very much
anyway,
so.
isn't it?
Yeah, and you need a gift. And it's
right.
So without this fella having done that, I'd have just bought the $500 flute and gone home, and it'd just been a hobby.
Mucked around with it like a ukulele or something.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. But as it turned out, I found this teacher, and I met his students, and I became friends with people, and what was going to be a 3-month stay in Japan ended up being 7 years.
Wow.
And the end of which the shakuhachi was, the focal point of at least my working life.
Amazing.
Yes, yeah, it's serendipity. Yes, totally.
That very special man in the department store.
Yes.
So now you've gone on through all these years of using your shakuhachi, and you've set up festivals, and you've done all sorts of amazing things. What's coming up next for you? Obviously, this piece by Ross Edwards is something that's a work in progress. That's going to be coming up soon?
Yes, that's going to happen sometime. I'm not sure of the actual...
Because it's in progress, I guess.
Yes,
There's no date set for that one yet.
Yes, eventually.
Yeah. But you've got all these albums on your website as well?
I do, yes. Lots of albums. And one of the newer ones, in fact, it hasn't been released yet, will be called The 5 Elements. It's for string quartet and shakuhachi. The Enigma Quartet and I have commissioned... We commissioned 8 Australian composers. I had commissioned one piece already for this ensemble, and one piece was composed for this ensemble. So we have 10 pieces, 2 pieces per element, and the element will be called the 5 Elements, and that'll probably be released in February.
In February, great. So you've to see all of Riley's music. If you're interested in buying some, you can buy it digitally or on CD. You can go to his website, rileylee.net. Nice and easy.
Yes, indeed.
It is. That's good. Thank you so much for coming in. It's been such a pleasure having you here, Riley.
Well, it certainly has been a pleasure for me too, Annabelle. Thank you.